This video couldn't have been made without Squarespace and their new design intelligence. T-14 Armata, a name attracting polite internet discussions like a moth to a flame. Made to revolutionize warfare a decade ago, it still sits in a development hell and will probably get GTA 6 earlier than see this tank enter serial production. Regardless, this tank is quite, and I mean quite advanced, even though it's pretty much based on a design some 40 years old. Let's dig through a mountain of misinformation and internet discussions and explore the iceberg-worthy history of Soviet tank development. Understanding where exactly Amarta came from, what it's made for, and answer the burning question, is there any future for the next generation of Russian heavy armor? Amarta is just a copy of an Abrams TTB, and it's bad, and it has an 80-year-old engine, and let me stop you right there. After the Yom Kippur War, where both sides were in conflict, and indirectly, West and East learned the truth about how modern tank warfare is about to change, both sides started developing next-generation tanks for the future of warfare. The Western approach was to build an extremely powerful and frontally well-armored tank with a new composite armor, increasing the weight significantly in the process, while the Soviets, well, didn't learn much. Or so you thought. In fact, back in the early 70s, Morozov Design Bureau, in today's Ukraine, started development, led by Alexander Morozov himself, of a new tank concept that would feature a separate crew compartment separate from the ammo storage to prevent ammo detonation upon impact. At the time, technology wasn't quite mature for such a project, so fast forward a decade and the Soviet government greenlighted a different new tank development program led by two design bureaus. The Morozov Design Bureau in Kharkiv, Ukraine, developed several proposals and prototypes. There was Object 490A, which led to the development of Object 477, also called the Molot or Hammer in translation, and Object 490B. Both tanks were really futuristic, with crewless turrets, armored crew compartments, thermal optics planned for them, and part of a new information-centric warfare, where the tank would transmit informations in real time to artillery, support units, and even to the Air Force. And you want to hear the crazy part? Object 490B would feature a 152mm gun instead of the usual 125mm gun, so that is a substantial upgrade. At the same time, in Leningrad, Object 299 was being developed, another quite futuristic concept for the era with the same principles applied. And you might be thinking, Nick, why are you babbling so much about these projects? Isn't this video about the Armata? That's what I clicked on. Well, hold on just a bit more and I promise you'll see the connection. So all while these tank concepts were being developed, two new engines were being developed in parallel, because a next generation tank would need a next generation engine as well. The Malyashev Bureau in Ukraine built the 6TD diesel engine with 1,000 horsepower and an option of future expansion to 1,200. And then there was the CHTZ from Chelyabinsk, who developed the 2V12 engine with 1,200 horsepower and a possible expansion to get it all the way up to 2,000 horsepower. These are some serious engines, folks. Oh, this is also the exact engine that the T-14 Armata uses. Do you see the connection? So let's flash forward to the 90s. Part of the reason why this tank has been, objectively, in development hell is because they can't decide on a final design. Something that plagues many people who try to build their own business. And that's why I recommend the new Squarespace design intelligence that will help you build the perfect website using cutting-edge AI technology to unlock your strongest creative potential yet. Squarespace will actually recommend a fantastic design to reach your goals. A more beautiful, more personalized website that will allow you to craft a bespoke digital identity and will actually never look like a template again. The game has changed when it comes to building websites thanks to Squarespace. But building a website is only the beginning, because you can actually run email campaigns, get more customers, and even launch courses on Squarespace. That's right, if you want to teach something, Squarespace is now your one-stop shop for your entire educational portal. In fact, I use Squarespace to power the official Found and Explained merch store. So if you want to give Squarespace a go, head to www.squarespace.com/found to try a free trial and to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The USSR has fallen apart, and all these fancy tank development programs have also fallen apart, and both the T-72 and T-80 seriously underperformed in real combat, namely in Chechnya. Obviously, this was part and due to the outdated doctrine, bad decision-making in the field, and still left Russia needing a new tank for the future. One program led to the development of the T-90, which in reality was a T-72 on steroids, but the other project, under the name Object 195, was far more interesting. This tank would be based on a longer upgraded chassis and a 1,500 horsepower A85 engine, the 2V12 successor, and that 152mm gun from the other project with a separate crew compartment and active protection, modern optics, and the best reactive armor available. Basically, this would be a successor to the 80s development from both Kharkiv and Leningrad combined together. Developed during the late 90s and tested in the early 2000s, it proved quite prospective, but the issues, namely with the engine and the gun, kept piling up, and when General Mayev, who led the project, asked for more money in 2005 to complete the development, he got a polite flip-off and the project was shut down. So Russia still found itself without a next-gen tank, and the quite mature concept of a crew-oriented vehicle was once again slammed in a drawer and the light was turned off. For a decade at least. The elusive Object 148 later reappeared as yet another next-generation tank. But in 2015, the world was shocked with not just a tank, but a series of new Russian vehicles at the 9th of May Victory Parade in Moscow. And then, this happened. This new tank seemingly broke down in the middle of Red Square. We'll get back to that a bit later, but this was certainly a bad omen for this new vehicle. However, now, 10 years later, the tank still hasn't entered mass production, and only several dozen vehicles have been built in a prototype manner for evaluation and testing. So what the hell happened, and what's the catch with the T-14 at all? Well, the T-14 Armata is quite a clever tank, to be honest, and the result of, well, as we've already explained, almost 40 years of development. Between 2015 and today, many details have surfaced, and we can talk a lot more about those details behind this tank that have made it so revolutionary. It features a completely new chassis and a new approach to tank design in general. The crew is made of three, a driver, a gunner, and a commander, but unlike usual tank design, they're located in the front of the vehicle in sort of a capsule, which should be able to protect them in case of a catastrophic ammo explosion, which is something that the Soviet tanks are quite famous for. Behind them is the unmanned turret with an autoloader and a 2.882 125mm gun. Remember how just a few minutes ago I was talking all about that famous 152mm gun? Well, as it turns out, part of the compromise of this design is that they had to downscale to a 125mm cannon, but we'll get more onto that later when we talk about its flaws. The autoloader is similar to the one on the T-80, and unlike the T-72 where the rounds are placed horizontally, here we have them placed vertically. This is good because it allows for more room, and it's bad because the profile of the autoloader is slightly larger, making it more susceptible if there's a penetration shot. Behind the armament section is the engine in another separate compartment, and this is probably the most controversial part of the Amarta design, and the reason why it never entered service. The engine used by the T-14 is the A85-3, a successor to the 2V12 design from the 1980s. It's a 1,500 horsepower engine with a possible future power expansion, which is one of the main requirements for this next-gen tank, due to ever-increasing weight and the fact that this has been the norm for Western tanks since the 1980s. The engine developed by Chelyabinsk CHTZ was never used in a serial production vehicle before, and had issues with overheating and oil consumption. At some point after 2015, the Bureau was awarded with a contract to develop a completely new engine with cylinders in a V-shape opposed to the X-shape 85 that it was based upon. This is probably an attempt to solve the engine issues with a design already familiar to engineers and push the serial production forward. But in 2020, we got the information about this so-called new Chaika engine was a failure and it wouldn't be used by the Amarta tank. So now we're back to square one using the original bad engine. Then in 2023, they had a technical congress to examine the design, where several issues were brought up, such as the problems with serial production, the 40-year-old design which is now outdated completely, the lack of other vehicles that use this engine, and the cost to develop this program. There was even a proposal to develop a completely third new engine from scratch, which would put the Armata on development hold indefinitely. So yeah, that's the story behind the engine and why the T-14 has an engine with under 1,500 horsepower that has subpar performance, and it's the key issue that prevents serial production. But let's move on to the turret. The turret itself seemed quite armoured with both composite and reactive armour at first sight, but this wasn't the case. In time, detailed pictures and even a 3D model surfaced on the internet showing that the Amarta turret uses very basic steel plates that aren't covered with composite armour at all. The only section covered with additional reactive armour is on top of the turret. The rest are just thin plates which wouldn't even be able to stop a 20 or 30mm rounds from an APC, or God forbid something like an ATGM or a Javelin rocket. The idea was to completely rely on the active protection system called the Afghanit, which was implemented in the vehicle. This consists of two forward-looking and side-to-side looking radars combined with launchers covering a frontal 120 to 180 degrees. This is a pretty standard active protection setup, but since 2015, modern warfare has changed significantly, and FPV drones are the biggest threat to tanks nowadays, so this all needs to change. The Israelis have already started their trophy APS against drones and adding launchers which can shoot targets directly above the tank. The Amarta tank has upward-looking launchers, but these are not part of the APS, rather aerosol containers which are meant to confuse the heat-seeking missile head, such as the Javelin, but these wouldn't work against an operator-guided weapon, such as a drone or an Israeli Spike ATGM. To top it all off, the turret features a separate commander sight, which is the norm today, as well as remote-controlled weapon station and 360 degrees laser and UV detection, with automatic smoke launchers as well as a countermeasure. The tank is also equipped with a forward and backward-looking cameras to enable the driver better visibility and 360-degree camera coverage for commander to have better situational awareness. And now if you think that the turret has flaws, we got to talk about the rest of the chassis. And we'll start with its armour. The front of the tank is very well armoured, even though it doesn't really look like that at first sight. The front plate of the chassis actually starts here, and everything from the front of it is a large composite armour block, covered with the latest Malachite reactive armour. The front upper plate is well covered with Malachite as well, and the side skirts, large blocks of reactive armour are covering both the crew compartment and the midsection where the ammunition is. But the only downside is that the engine isn't covered at all with any additional armor from the sides, so it'd be quite easy to demobilize the tank with a shot in this area right here. If the APS works as intended, the turret truly doesn't need heavy and elaborate armor, but a Bradley with a 20mm autocannon could be able to obliterate the optics and the turret of this tank if it caught it off guard. And that's something to think about. As we already mentioned, drones don't care about the armor, and they will hit you wherever the armor is weakest, so active protection needs to work against them as well. In terms of offensive capability, the main APF SDS rounds of the T-14 are quite good, namely the Vacuum 1 and 2, and they can penetrate any modern Western vehicle. But all of this is nice on paper. The issue is, this tank still hasn't entered serial production 10 years after its initial reveal, and that's a big problem. The Armata is more than just a tank. It was supposed to be a whole family of vehicles, which would significantly impact the production costs and offer a truly next generation of armor for the Russian army. The first was the T-15, an infantry support vehicle of the same chassis with some serious firepower, either a 30mm or a 57mm autocannon, ATGMs, and heavy machine guns. It can carry 8 soldiers in full gear and has a ramp on the back for disembarking, and it's equipped with all the protection systems of the T-14. And then there was supposed to be the T-16, a recovery vehicle on the same chassis. The engineers also came up with the 2S-35, also called the Kolitsia, which is a self-propelled artillery vehicle. And then there's also the proposed heavy tank support vehicle, namely for urban combat under the name BMPT-3. There were also several specialized variants proposed, such as a mortar carrier, but the thing is, none of this has entered service. Why, you may ask? Well, because of several reasons. The Armata was to be the platform that doesn't use Western-made components at all, but the Russians are still so far behind the West in optics, and the tanks have been using the French-made thermals for a long time. The engine is still a lingering issue that still hasn't been solved and remains to be solved for the time being. And last but not least, warfare has changed completely, and the T-14 needs several upgrades to compete on a modern battlefield. And that's just in addition to the entirety of the Russian military that needs their doctrine changed and a different approach to modern warfare. And until many of these technical, engineering, and even bureaucratic problems are solved, we can't expect to see any new vehicles enter service. To conclude this video, the T-14 and the Amarta family of vehicles are certainly a promising concept for the Russian military. Hell, even the future Abrams successor has most of the requirements as the T-14. But after the war in Ukraine and the budgetary constraints along with sanctions and having to develop all of the technology by themselves, the future of this tank is a seriously big if. It is a step in the right direction, one figured out 40 years ago when the USSR was mighty and powerful, but it never materialized, and it yet may still be just a fever dream. Thanks for watching, and please don't blow up a nuke in the comments all about this tank, and have a great rest of the week.